Lee Strobel was an atheist and hostile towards Christianity or any belief in an all-powerful God whatsoever. He attended Yale Law School and the University of Missouri, where he obtained his Bachelor of Journalism degree. He was a legal affairs editor and journalist for the Chicago Tribune and other newspapers for 14 years and won the Illinois' highest honors for investigative reporting and public service journalism from United Press International. That being said, Lee definitely knew how to conduct investigations and look for evidence. And just so I don't discredit him or anything, most of my information is coming from Lee Strobel's well-gathered knowledge from an almost 2-year investigation that he conducted. During his career at the Chicago Tribune, Lee's wife, Leslie, one day became a Christian, and as you can imagine, he wasn't too thrilled about that. But Lee reports that he eventually saw beneficial changes in Leslie's character. He noticed something different, something attractive about her after she converted to Christianity. But Lee still wanted the old, carefree Leslie back, compelling him to begin his quest of disproving Christianity. And the easiest way to do that, he thought, disprove the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We find in the Bible that Jesus claimed to be God. In fact, in John 10:30, Jesus says, "I and the Father are one." So if Jesus, who claimed to be God, died and then 3 days later rose from the dead like he said he would, that would logically verify his claims of being God, right? Likewise, if he didn't rise from the dead like he said he would, this would refute his claims of being God, thus disproving Christianity as a whole. People have tried to disprove the resurrection of Christ through different theories. One of these theories, known as the swoon theory, suggests that Jesus fainted on the cross rather than dying, but the evidence for Christ's death on the cross strongly goes against the swoon theory and others like it. See, the Roman soldiers were expert executioners and did their jobs exceedingly well. They made sure that their victims experienced immense pain during crucifixion and made certain that their victims were dead and stayed that way. If a prisoner got away alive, the soldiers themselves would be executed. One of the indications that Jesus died is that in the scriptures, when one of the Roman soldiers went to pierce his side with a spear, water and blood poured out, which we now know to be a result of pericardial effusion, which was a result of Jesus' death by asphyxiation. And that is a death one cannot fake. There was no doubt that Jesus died on the cross before he was placed in the tomb. Even if he did survive the floggings and crucifixion, which would be physically impossible, he was later wrapped in burial cloths and spices to preserve his body, which weighed about 75 to 100 pounds. Also, the stone that sealed the entrance of the tomb would have weighed about 2,000 to 4,000 pounds, which would obviously be impossible to roll away for any man, let alone someone who had just been flogged, beaten, and crucified to the point where he was unrecognizable as a human being. According to Lee Strobel, quote, "There is virtually no dispute among ancient historians that Jesus was dead after being crucified under Pontius Pilate. Why? Because when we study ancient history, we're lucky if we get one or maybe two sources to confirm a fact. And yet, for the death of Jesus, we not only have multiple early 1st century accounts in the records that are contained in the New Testament, we've also got 5 ancient sources outside the Bible confirming and corroborating his death." End quote. If historians have only 1 or 2 ancient sources to verify many historical facts that we so strongly believe in, then logically we wouldn't doubt the death of Jesus as a historical fact. Even the Scientific Journal of the American Medical Association admits the death of Jesus as a historical fact based on an investigation that they made. The evidence is clear. Jesus simply did not survive the crucifixion. As far as Jesus rising from the dead, there were claims against this as well, but there is evidence that refutes these claims. The earliest excuse for the tomb, or the empty tomb, is actually mentioned in the scriptures when the Pharisees went to the Roman soldiers with a sum of money and a cover-up story. They told the Roman soldiers to say that the disciples stole the body while they were sleeping on duty. But notice that the Pharisees themselves didn't deny that the tomb was empty. As far as I know, in the Gospels they never even denied any of the miracles of Jesus, but instead came up with various excuses trying to explain as to how he did what he did. Anyways, take notice that the Pharisees themselves never denied that the tomb was empty. The first thing they did was come up with a cover-up story to explain why the tomb was empty in the first place. Also, the disciples couldn't have stolen the body of Jesus even if they wanted to. There would have been a unit or squadron of highly trained Roman guards. At this point, the odds don't seem to be in the fishermen's favor. Also, the guards would have been executed for falling asleep on the job or letting a prisoner escape. The disciples didn't have the means to steal the body anyways. As the scriptures tell us, they actually went into hiding when Jesus died because they were so afraid. Even if they dared to attempt to steal the body, it wouldn't do them any good to somehow fight or slip past the Roman guards, break the seal of the Roman tomb, which was punishable by death in of itself, roll the 2,000 to 4,000 pound stone away, drag the body elsewhere undetected, only to tell the people that he resurrected like he said he would. According to the scriptures, after the death of Jesus, while the disciples were in hiding for their fear of the Jews, Christ appeared to them and many others, and they went out and proclaimed the gospel. Also, we believe, mostly from extra-biblical sources, that all of the 12 disciples, except for John and Judas, were tortured and executed for their faith. Some of these deaths include being sawn in half, crucifixion, and beheading. The Christian theologian Tertullian, I believe his name is, writes that John, one of the disciples that wasn't martyred for his faith, miraculously survived being boiled alive in a cauldron of hot oil in the Colosseum. Logically, if these men were lying, they would have renounced their claims when facing persecution. The next theory I will address is the one that suggests the eyewitnesses of the resurrected Christ all hallucinated what they saw. If there was only one eyewitness, then maybe I could see why one would subscribe to this theory, but it would be scientifically and mathematically impossible to have more than one person hallucinate the same thing at the same time. Yes, it would be impossible for two people alone to have the same hallucination at the same time and at the same place, but we have to keep in mind that there were more than 500 eyewitnesses to the resurrected Christ within a span of only 40 days, according to the scriptures. The Apostle Paul writes that Jesus appeared to over 500 people at the same time, actually. Remember that we accept events as historical fact even though we only have one or two original written accounts of those events? Well, for the resurrection of Jesus, according to Lee Strobel, we have no less than 9 ancient written accounts of the resurrection inside and outside the New Testament. I also found an article by Avalon Church that lists no less than 16 secular sources outside of the Bible that mention Jesus, his followers, or allude to his resurrection, not including the other 5 disputable sources. Returning to Lee Strobel's story, in the end, with the avalanche of evidence that Lee had collected over his almost 2-year investigation, he realized that it would take more faith to continue in his atheism than it would be to believe in God. Makes sense to me. Lee had finally reached a verdict. He not only was unable to disprove the resurrection of Jesus, but actually ended up proving it in his various attempts to refute it, verifying that Jesus is who he said he was, the Son of the living God. Thank you for listening.